The stillness of a garden, its tranquility shattered by an unseen threat. The leaves rustle in the quiet evening air, hiding a secret no one dares to speak of. Beneath the surface of this peaceful world, dark truths grow like hidden thorns, waiting to pierce through the fabric of daily life. This is no ordinary garden. It is a silent witness to a crime that no one can explain. As we step into the world of the unknown, prepare to uncover the layers of deception that conceal the truth. It's time to let the silence speak for itself. If you're ready to dive into this web of mystery, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, because the truth might just change everything you thought you knew. Chapter 1. The Silent Garden. The garden was silent, too silent. Its once vibrant colors, now muted under the weight of dusk, seemed to whisper secrets to those who dared listen. The air hung thick with the scent of jasmine, the remnants of a summer rain still clinging to the earth like a long-forgotten memory. Yet beneath this quiet veil of peace, something stirred, something unseen. The leaves trembled in the wind, but not with the carefree dance of nature. No, these rustlings held the weight of a dark promise. It was as if the garden itself had become a witness, a silent observer of something far more sinister than mere horticulture. The detective stood at the gate, his boots softly crunching against the gravel path that led into the heart of the garden. His gaze swept over the carefully arranged flower beds, the ancient stone fountains that had long stopped flowing, the creeping ivy that clung to every wall like a shroud. There was a beauty here, yes, but it was a beauty steeped in melancholy, as if the garden knew what was about to unfold and was resigned to it. The detective had been called here on an anonymous tip, a vague message scribbled in haste, a cryptic warning that something terrible had taken place. No details, no names, just the chilling directive. Look closer at the garden. It holds the truth. He had no idea what that truth was. No idea why this particular garden, so full of life, would harbor any form of danger. But there it was. The feeling in the air, the kind that presses against your chest, leaving you breathless and uncertain. He had learned long ago that instinct, when honed by years of experience, is rarely wrong. The garden was hiding something, and he had to find it before it was too late. As he ventured deeper, the path narrowed, the foliage thickening around him like a protective barrier, as though the garden itself sought to keep him away from its darkest secrets. He brushed past a row of overgrown bushes, their sharp leaves scratching at his coat. A shadow flitted across the corner of his eye, and for a moment, he thought he saw something, or someone, move just beyond the hedgerow. He froze, his hand instinctively reaching for the comforting weight of the gun holstered at his side. The only sound now was the soft rustle of the wind and the distant chirp of crickets. But the moment had passed, and there was nothing there. The detective took a slow breath, pushing the unease down into the pit of his stomach. There was no time for hesitation. He continued forward, moving past the twisting vines that seemed to reach out like fingers, their tendrils pulling him deeper into the heart of the garden. Every step felt like a step into the unknown. The garden was no longer just a garden. It was a stage, and he was its unwilling actor, poised to uncover the hidden drama that had played out within these walls. In the center of the garden stood a statue, an angel, its wings spread wide, though one was chipped and cracked, as if the figure had been struck by some unseen force. The detective paused, looking at the figure, wondering what it symbolized. Could it have been an omen, standing silent and unblinking in the middle of this labyrinth of overgrowth and shadow? Was it there to remind him of the fragility of life, or to mock him with the futility of his search? He knelt down beside it, brushing away the moss that clung to its base, and there, just beneath the stone, a small, folded note caught his eye. It was damp, the ink beginning to bleed in places, but still legible. Find the witness. A simple message, but one that carried more weight than he could comprehend at that moment. A witness? The detective's brow furrowed. Who had witnessed what? And why had they left this message here, in this forsaken corner of the garden? Before he could contemplate the implications of the note, a sound broke the silence. The unmistakable crunch of footsteps on the gravel path. Someone was coming. The detective quickly stuffed the note into his pocket, his hand tightening around the handle of his gun. He stood up, his posture rigid, his senses sharpened. From the shadows, a figure emerged. A woman, her face obscured by the wide brim of her hat, her figure draped in a dark cloak. She moved with purpose, her eyes scanning the garden, as if searching for something, or someone. The detective's gaze lingered on her, his instincts screaming that she was more than she appeared. He watched as she passed by, unaware of his presence, before disappearing into the thick undergrowth. The detective didn't follow her. Not yet. He wasn't sure if she was the witness the note referred to, or if she was just another piece of this puzzle. But for now, he needed more information. More pieces. The garden was silent once more, but it was no longer the calm, inviting space he had first encountered. Now, it felt like a ticking time bomb, waiting for the right moment to detonate. He turned and walked back to the gate, his mind already racing with questions. What was this garden hiding? What had happened here that left a trail of whispers and uncertainty? The answers were out there, but they were buried deep beneath the surface, just like the garden itself. And he would dig as deep as it took until he uncovered everything it was hiding. The air was growing colder now, a subtle shift in temperature that could not be ignored. It was the kind of cold that didn't come from the night itself, but from something deeper, something older. The detective couldn't shake the feeling that the garden was watching him. It wasn't just the silent trees or the rustling leaves. It was the garden's very essence, as if the earth itself held its breath. There was something alive here, something that knew its time was running out. He made his way toward the back of the garden, where the trees grew thicker, their branches twisting and intertwining as though they were reaching for something. The path had long since disappeared under layers of fallen leaves and creeping vines, but he pressed on, his boots sinking into the damp earth with each step. The deeper he ventured, the more the world seemed to close in on him. The garden wasn't just a space of greenery and life. It was a prison, its walls woven with secrets that had been buried long ago. The detective's mind wandered back to the note, the cryptic words haunting him. Find the witness. He had been expecting a more obvious clue, a trail of breadcrumbs leading him straight to the answer. But instead, the garden had given him nothing but shadows. The missing witness, whoever they were, held the key to understanding what had happened here. But why had they left such a vague message? Why the secrecy? And why here, of all places? As he walked further, the garden seemed to shift before his eyes. The flowers, once vibrant with color, now appeared dull and lifeless, their petals wilting as if drained of their vitality. The stone benches, weathered and covered in moss, looked like ancient relics from a forgotten time. Even the air seemed thicker now, pressing in on him from all sides. Was it the weight of the mystery, or was the garden itself changing around him? He couldn't tell, but one thing was certain. He was no longer just an observer. The garden had chosen him, and now it demanded answers. A soft sound broke through the stillness, drawing his attention. It was a whisper, faint and barely audible, as if the garden itself were speaking to him. He stopped, straining to listen, his breath held in the silence. But the whisper was gone, replaced by the gentle creaking of a distant wooden gate. His pulse quickened. Had someone else entered the garden? The woman in the cloak, perhaps? Or was it another player in this strange game? The detective followed the sound, his steps now deliberate and cautious. He moved toward the edge of the garden, where the trees opened up to reveal a small, overgrown clearing. At the center of the clearing stood a well, its stone walls weathered and cracked with age. The rope that once hung from the pulley had long since frayed and fallen, but the well remained, as if frozen in time. He approached the well, his hand reaching out to touch the cold stone. The surface was slick with moss, and the scent of damp earth filled his nose. He peered down into the darkness below, but the bottom was obscured by shadows, the depths impossible to see. Yet as his eyes adjusted to the gloom, he thought he saw something, a faint glimmer of metal, barely visible in the dim light. It was just a flash, a brief flicker of something that didn't belong. Without thinking, he knelt down, pulling his flashlight from his belt and shining it into the well. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing the object that had caught his eye, a small, tarnished coin lying at the bottom of the well. He reached into his pocket, pulling out a thin piece of string to lower his flashlight further into the depths. As the light sank deeper, the detective's mind raced. Coins were a strange thing to find in a well, but it was the absence of anything else around it that drew his attention. There was no sign of water, no debris, no rust or decay from the years of disuse. It was almost as if the well had been preserved, untouched, undisturbed, waiting for something to happen. The coin was simple enough, a round disc with no markings, no engravings, nothing to indicate its origin. But the moment he touched it, a cold shiver ran down his spine. The coin seemed to pulse with an eerie energy, as though it were alive in his hand. He could feel it, the weight of history, the burden of something long past. Suddenly, the ground beneath his feet shifted, a low rumble vibrating through the earth. The detective froze, his heart hammering in his chest. The garden seemed to come alive with the sound of whispers, a chorus of voices rising from the depths of the earth. He quickly looked around, but there was no one in sight. The whispering grew louder, more insistent. It wasn't coming from anywhere outside the garden. It was coming from within. The detective stood up, his eyes scanning the surroundings as the voices swirled in his ears. They were fragmented, broken, as if they were fragments of memories lost in time. He couldn't make out the words, but he could feel their weight, their urgency. The coin burned in his palm, the temperature rising as though it were feeding on the energy around it. The detective glanced at the well again, but this time he saw something else. A shadow moving in the depths, something that had been hiding there all along. His instincts screamed at him to turn away, to run, but something kept him rooted to the spot. The coin, the well, the whispers, it was all connected. This was no ordinary garden, and this was no ordinary mystery. The detective had crossed a line, and there was no going back now. Whatever waited in the shadows had begun to stir, and it would take everything he had to uncover the truth. Chapter 2. The Missing Witness. The night pressed in around him, its chill now seeping into his bones. The whispers had died down, replaced by the oppressive silence that only deepened the tension in the air. The detective stood still, his hand still gripping the coin, as the garden seemed to close in on him. The well had revealed its secret, or at least part of it, but the rest of the puzzle remained maddeningly out of reach. He couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching him, waiting for him to make the next move. He glanced at the well one last time, then slowly began to make his way back toward the gate. The woman, the figure in the cloak, lingered in his thoughts. She had come and gone like a shadow, moving through the garden with purpose. She hadn't seemed frightened by the mystery that surrounded them. If anything, she appeared to know more than she let on. The missing witness, perhaps. But why had she remained silent? Why hadn't she come forward with the truth? As he retraced his steps, the detective couldn't help but think about the message he had found. Find the witness. Who was the witness? And why had they left him such a cryptic clue? Every inch of the garden seemed to pulse with unanswered questions, each shadow and hidden corner brimming with secrets. The more he searched, the more elusive the truth became. Every time he thought he was close to understanding, the answers slipped further from his grasp. He reached the edge of the garden, where the path led out into the street. The city, though distant, felt worlds away from the garden's suffocating grip. The street lamps flickered in the twilight, casting long shadows across the cobblestones. The detective paused for a moment, breathing in the cool night air. It felt like the calm before a storm, quiet, but charged with an undeniable sense of anticipation. His instincts told him that the answers lay just beyond his reach. All he had to do was push a little harder, dig a little deeper. His thoughts were interrupted by a sound, a soft thud, almost imperceptible, as if something heavy had been dropped onto the ground. He turned sharply, his hand instinctively reaching for his gun, but the street was empty. Nothing moved. The silence returned, thick and suffocating. The detective let out a slow breath, his nerves still on edge. He was losing time. The missing witness had to be found, and soon. The longer they remained hidden, the more the garden's secrets threatened to consume everything in its path. The detective had no choice but to continue his search, even if it meant turning over every stone in the garden and beyond. His mind returned to the woman in the cloak. Something about her had intrigued him, something more than her mysterious presence in the garden. He had seen her for only a moment, yet her eyes, dark, filled with something unreadable, had stayed with him. She had looked at him as though she knew exactly who he was, as though she had been waiting for him to arrive. He had assumed she was simply another stranger in the garden, but now he wasn't so sure. The detective couldn't afford to waste time on assumptions. The garden had shown him that. It had laid its cards on the table, but it was clear that there was more to uncover. He needed to find the woman, or whoever else might hold the key to unraveling this mystery. Whoever had left that note, whoever had hidden the truth so carefully, he needed to find them before it was too late. The search led him through the city, the streets now quieter, the shadows deeper. He passed the familiar landmarks, each one unchanged, but nothing seemed to offer him any clarity. The detective's thoughts churned as he walked, piecing together the fragments of his investigation. The well, the coin, the woman in the cloak, it all pointed to something larger, something that he had yet to fully understand. The garden had given him the first piece, but there were more pieces to find. As he turned down a narrow alley, his eyes caught a glimpse of something. A figure, barely visible in the shadows, standing still as if waiting. The detective's heart skipped a beat. Could this be the witness? Or had he finally tracked down the woman from the garden? He approached cautiously, his footsteps muffled by the cobblestone streets. The figure didn't move, didn't acknowledge his presence. He stopped a few feet away and called out softly, "Are you the one I've been looking for?" The figure stirred, but didn't speak. Instead, they reached into the folds of their cloak and withdrew something, an envelope. The detective didn't hesitate. He stepped forward, taking the envelope from the figure's outstretched hand. Without a word, the figure turned and disappeared into the shadows, melting into the night like a ghost. The detective opened the envelope, his hands steady despite the rising tension in his chest. Inside, he found a single sheet of paper, its edges worn and frayed, as if it had been handled many times. The writing on the paper was brief, but the message was clear. The garden's truth lies buried beneath the surface, but beware, for those who seek it will not leave unscathed. The word sent a chill down his spine. The garden's truth, buried beneath the surface. The detective knew that this message was no coincidence. Whoever had left it was warning him, but warning him about what? The thought gnawed at him, the pieces of the puzzle beginning to click together in a way that he wasn't entirely ready for. The silence of the night seemed to press in closer, and the detective knew that he was getting closer. The truth was within reach, but the closer he came to uncovering it, the more dangerous it seemed. Whatever lay hidden beneath the garden surface, it wasn't just a mystery. It was a force that could change everything. The detective folded the note carefully, slipping it into his coat pocket. There was no turning back now. The game had begun. The detective couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out, as if the shadows themselves were closing in, eager to swallow him whole. He stood there in the alleyway, staring at the envelope in his hand. The faint hum of the city, distant but insistent, seemed like a distant echo now. His thoughts were consumed by the warning, the chilling words that rattled in his mind like a broken record. The garden's truth lies buried beneath the surface, but beware, for those who seek it will not leave unscathed. He looked down at the envelope again, his mind racing. What could it mean? The garden's truth was buried beneath the surface. Was it a literal meaning? Something hidden in the earth? Or was it a metaphor? A deeper, darker secret lying in wait, one that could cost him everything to uncover. He couldn't afford to waste time deciphering riddles. He needed to find the missing witness, and he needed to do it fast. But who exactly was this witness? Was it the woman in the cloak? The one who had disappeared so swiftly into the night? Or someone else entirely? Someone who had yet to reveal themselves? His fingers closed tightly around the envelope, a sense of urgency gnawing at him. He couldn't afford to be distracted. This case was no longer just about solving a mystery. It was about survival. He had no idea what forces he was dealing with, but he knew that every step he took would lead him closer to the truth, for better or for worse. The detective made his way to the nearest tavern, the warm glow of light spilling from the windows, casting long shadows on the street. He pushed open the door and entered, the faint scent of stale beer and tobacco filling his lungs. Inside, the air was thick with the low hum of conversation, the clinking of glasses, the occasional burst of laughter. No one paid him any mind as he made his way to the bar. He ordered a drink, his gaze scanning the room, searching for something or someone out of place. His eyes flitted over the patrons, each absorbed in their own worlds, lost in their conversations, their lives. But amidst the noise and the chaos, there was a flicker of movement in the far corner. A man, sitting alone at a table, his face half obscured by the shadow of his hat. His posture was stiff, his hands fidgeting with something, a piece of paper perhaps. The detective's instincts kicked in. There was something about the man that didn't quite fit. He made his way over, taking a seat across from the stranger, his eyes narrowing. The man didn't look up, but the detective could feel the weight of his silence. It was a silence that spoke volumes. It was the kind of silence that meant someone was hiding something. Looking for someone, the detective asked, his voice low and steady. The man stiffened, then slowly raised his head. His eyes met the detective's with a guarded, wary look. For a moment, neither of them spoke. It was a moment filled with unspoken words, a quiet tension hanging between them like a thread, ready to snap at the slightest pull. "I know what you're after," the man finally said, his voice hoarse. "But you'll regret it if you go any further. Some things are better left buried." The detective leaned forward, his eyes never leaving the man's face. "You know something about the garden, don't you?" The man's eyes flickered, but he didn't answer. Instead, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small crumpled piece of paper. He slid it across the table, his fingers trembling slightly as he did. The detective picked it up and unfolded it, his gaze scanning the hastily written message. "Follow the path beneath the ivy. The truth lies where the roots twist, but beware, the price of knowledge is steep." The detective's heart skipped a beat. Another clue, another piece of the puzzle. But this one felt different. This one felt personal, like a warning from someone who had seen the darkness firsthand. He looked up at the man, but the stranger had already turned away, his face hidden once more beneath the shadow of his hat. The detective knew he had to act quickly. The man had given him a lead, but the message was cryptic, vague. Beneath the ivy, where the roots twist. What could it mean? The garden was full of ivy, creeping up the walls, weaving its way through the landscape like a serpent. But where the roots twisted, the detective couldn't afford to waste time guessing. He had to follow the trail, even if it led him into the heart of danger. He stood up, his mind focused, his determination hardening like steel. Whatever was hidden beneath the surface of that garden, he was going to find it. And he was going to bring the truth to light, no matter the cost. The detective made his way back to the garden, the shadows of the night pressing in on him as he moved. The air was thick with tension, the weight of the unknown hanging over him like a storm about to break. He couldn't shake the feeling that the garden was alive, that it was watching him, waiting for him to make the next move. He reached the gate, his hand resting on the cold iron as he looked up at the overgrown path. The ivy had grown thick here, wrapping itself around the stone walls like a living thing. He stepped forward, the ground beneath him soft and uneven as he pushed deeper into the heart of the garden. The ivy closed in around him, its tendrils brushing against his skin like the fingers of some unseen force. He moved cautiously, his eyes scanning the ground, looking for any sign of where the roots might twist. The further he went, the more the garden seemed to shift around him. The air grew thicker, the silence deeper, until it felt as if the garden itself were holding its breath. And then, just as the path seemed to narrow to nothing, he saw it. The faint outline of a stone slab, half hidden beneath a blanket of ivy. He knelt down, brushing the vines aside, and there it was, an entrance, hidden in plain sight, waiting for someone to find it. The detective's heart raced. This was it, the garden's secret. He had found it. But now the real question remained. What would he find when he stepped into the darkness? Chapter 3. The Long Shadow. The entrance was hidden, as if the garden itself had tried to keep it secret. Its roots, its vines, its dark history buried deep within the earth. Yet now, with the ivy parted and the stone revealed, the detective could feel the weight of what lay beyond. The air shifted, colder, heavier. It wasn't just a passage, it was a threshold, one that once crossed could never be undone. There was no turning back now. The truth was waiting, buried deep in the shadows, and the detective had no choice but to face it head on. He took a deep breath and pushed the stone slab aside. It groaned against its weight, but eventually it gave way, revealing a narrow, spiraling staircase leading down into the darkness. His flashlight flickered as he shone it into the abyss below, casting long, wavering shadows on the stone walls that seemed to pulse with life. Every instinct in his body screamed at him to turn away, to leave the mystery unsolved, but the words of the missing witness echoed in his mind. Find the witness. And he couldn't stop now, not when he was so close. With one last glance over his shoulder, he descended into the unknown. The staircase seemed to stretch on forever, winding deeper into the earth with each step. The air grew damp, thick with the scent of decay, the faint echo of distant, almost imperceptible whispers filling his ears. It was as though the garden itself had a voice that spoke through the soil, through the roots, through the very stone beneath his feet. He could feel it, the oppressive weight of history, of secrets buried so deep that they threatened to swallow him whole. At the bottom of the staircase, the path opened up into a vast underground chamber. The walls were covered in moss and thick vines, but there was something else there, too. A strange, unidentifiable symbol carved into the stone, glowing faintly with an otherworldly light. It was a symbol he didn't recognize, its meaning lost to time, but it felt ancient, powerful, dangerous. The detective stepped forward cautiously, his flashlight casting a narrow beam of light on the walls, the floor. Everything here was damp and cold, as though the air itself had never seen the light of day. He was in the bowels of the garden now, the heart of its mystery. And the deeper he went, the more certain he became that this was no mere hiding place. It was a ritual site, a place where something had been buried, something ancient that demanded respect, or fear, or both. There was no sound here, no movement, no life, only the cold, empty air that pressed against him from all sides. The silence was almost suffocating, and for a moment he questioned whether he was truly alone. The whispers, faint at first, grew louder now. They weren't coming from anywhere in particular, but rather from everywhere. The walls, the stones, even the floor beneath his feet seemed to hum with energy, as if something was awakening. He could feel it, a presence, dark and ancient, stirring beneath the surface. He took another step forward, his flashlight illuminating the far corner of the chamber. There, in the distance, a figure stood, motionless, shrouded in shadow. The detective's heart skipped a beat. This was no mere illusion. The figure was real, and it had been waiting for him. He called out, his voice echoing through the chamber, but the figure didn't respond. Instead, it shifted, its form flickering as if caught between worlds. The detective stepped forward, his gaze locked on the figure, his hand tightening on the flashlight. "Who are you?" he demanded, his voice barely more than a whisper. The figure did not answer. It only moved closer, its shape becoming more defined in the flickering light. It was a woman, her face obscured by the hood of her cloak. Her movements were slow, deliberate, as though she were drawn by some unseen force, some force that could not be ignored. The detective took another step, his pulse quickening. "What do you know about the garden?" he asked, his words firm, but there was a tremor in his voice. The figure's eyes, dark and unblinking, met his. And then, for the first time, the woman spoke. "The garden is not what you think," she said, her voice low, almost inaudible, as if carried by the wind itself. "It has always been here, watching, waiting, and it will never let you go." The detective felt a chill run down his spine. He had known somewhere deep inside that this garden, this place, was not just a collection of plants and stone. It was something far older, far more dangerous. And now, standing before this mysterious figure, he understood that the garden's truth was not just buried beneath the surface. It was alive. The woman stepped forward, her face now fully visible in the dim light. Her eyes were filled with sorrow, but also with a deep, unspoken knowledge. She was not the witness he had been searching for. No, she was something else. Someone who had been caught in the garden's web long before he had arrived. "You don't understand," she continued, her voice barely a whisper. "You think you can walk away, that you can leave with your answers. But the garden does not let its secrets go so easily. Those who seek it are never the same when they leave." The detective stared at her, his mind racing. There was so much she wasn't telling him, so much she was holding back. He could feel the pressure of her words, the weight of her warning pressing down on him. But he couldn't stop now. He had come too far. "I'm not leaving," he said, his voice firm, resolute. "Not until I know the truth." The woman's lips curled into a faint, almost sad smile. "The truth is a dangerous thing to seek," she whispered. "It can break you, or it can make you." She reached out, her hand brushing against his, and in that instant, everything seemed to change. The ground beneath them trembled, the air growing thick with an unbearable pressure. The figure flickered once more, then vanished into the darkness, leaving the detective standing alone in the chamber, the echoes of her warning ringing in his ears. The garden had shown him a glimpse of its secret. But the truth, true, unrelenting truth, was something far darker, far more terrifying than he had ever imagined. Chapter 4. The Unraveling Thread. Word count target, 600 to 800 words. The chamber fell silent once more, but the stillness was oppressive, as if the air itself had turned stale in the wake of the woman's cryptic warning. The detective's heart raced in his chest, the rhythmic pounding a stark contrast to the dead quiet around him. The shadows stretched long and deep, but the figure, the woman who had spoken of the garden's dark secret, was gone. Her words echoed in his mind, reverberating like the final note of a dirge. The truth is a dangerous thing to seek. He stood there, rooted to the spot, his senses heightened, acutely aware of the chilling atmosphere surrounding him. The walls seemed to lean in closer, as if listening to his every breath. The garden, the ancient mystery, was closing in. No longer was it just an investigation. It had become a descent into madness, a race against something unseen, something ancient that had been waiting far longer than he had imagined. The flashlight's beam wavered as his hand trembled slightly, but he steadied himself, pushing the fear down. He couldn't afford to be afraid. Not now. Not when the final pieces of the puzzle were within his grasp. The truth, no matter how terrible it would be, was buried here, and he couldn't walk away now. He had come too far to stop. The detective turned his gaze back to the stone walls, his mind searching for anything that might guide him deeper into the mystery. As he approached the farthest corner of the chamber, something caught his eye. A narrow passageway, hidden behind the thick vines and moss that had overtaken the stone. He ran his hand across the surface, the texture rough against his skin, and in that instant, he felt the faintest shift, like a release, as though the stone was moving. With a grunt, he pressed against the wall, and it slowly, almost reluctantly, slid aside, revealing a narrow, winding corridor beyond. The path was dark, its length indistinct, but the detective's resolve hardened. Every step felt like it led him further into the heart of the unknown. The air, already thick with moisture, became heavier, saturated with a deep, ancient energy that made every breath feel like a struggle. But there was no turning back now. The garden was alive, its secrets wrapped in layers of shadows and whispers, and he was determined to pull them into the light. The corridor twisted, the air growing colder with each step, until he emerged into another vast space. This one different from the chamber he had just left. The room was vast, its walls seemingly endless, stretching into the dark recesses of the earth. At the center of the room was a massive stone altar, ancient and worn, but still imposing, as if it had stood there for centuries, watching over the garden's secrets. Blood-red stains marred its surface, still fresh despite the years of decay that surrounded it. The sight sent a wave of nausea through the detective, but he pressed on, determined to uncover the truth. On the altar lay something, an object wrapped in tattered cloth, hidden from sight. His heartbeat quickened, the hairs on the back of his neck standing on end as he approached. As he reached out, he felt the cool stone of the altar beneath his fingertips, the chill of it almost sending a jolt through his hand. He uncovered the object slowly, unwilling to rush. Beneath the cloth was a small, tarnished chest, its surface engraved with the same strange symbols he had seen earlier in the garden. The same symbols that had glowed with an eerie light in the hidden chamber. His hands shook as he opened the chest, revealing what was inside. Papers, ancient scrolls, faded and brittle with age. They had been preserved carefully, wrapped tightly, as if the truth contained within them was too dangerous to be exposed to the light of day. The detective unrolled the first scroll, his eyes scanning the fragile parchment, the faded ink barely legible. But there it was, written in a script that seemed to pulse with an ancient energy. The garden has witnessed all things. It is a vessel for the forgotten, the lost, the broken. Those who seek its truth shall find it, but it will cost them their soul. The garden will never let you leave. The words sent a chill racing through the detective's spine. The garden was more than a place. It was an entity, alive and conscious, a force that had been feeding on the fears and secrets of those who had dared to uncover its truth. The thought was terrifying. The garden was not just a garden. It was a living, breathing thing, bound to the earth in ways no one could fully comprehend. And now, he understood. It had been waiting for someone like him to come, to unravel its mysteries, to break its silence. The detective closed his eyes for a moment, letting the weight of the scroll's words settle over him. He had come here looking for answers, but now he realized that the answers would come at a price that could destroy him. Suddenly, the ground trembled, the walls shifting as though the very chamber itself were awakening. The whispers returned, louder this time, filling his ears with fragmented phrases. The garden never forgets. You cannot leave. It will claim you. The detective's breath caught in his throat as the room seemed to darken, the air thick with an invisible presence. He could feel it now. The garden was alive, and it was reaching for him. He turned to flee, but the passageway was gone. The stone walls had sealed themselves behind him, trapping him in the room with the altar, with the truth he had uncovered. There was no escape. The garden had claimed him. Chapter 5. The Last Act. The walls closed in, the stone grinding against stone, sealing the detective in the chamber, with only the faint glow of the altar's symbols illuminating the suffocating darkness. The air was thick, almost oppressive, as though the very space around him had grown heavier, more sentient. His breath quickened, and for a moment, panic threatened to overtake him. The garden, this living entity that had drawn him in, had lured him deep into his heart, was closing its grip. He stumbled backward, his pulse racing, but there was nowhere to go. The room, once vast and open, now felt impossibly small, its corners stretching and narrowing as the walls seemed to lean in. The whispers surrounded him, their voices rising in pitch until they were almost unbearable. They spoke in fragments and riddles, their meaning elusive, but their weight undeniable. The garden watches. The garden remembers. The garden will never let you go. The detective clutched the scroll in his hand, the fragile parchment crinkling beneath his fingers as his grip tightened. He had come here to uncover the truth, to solve the mystery that had haunted this place for centuries. But now he understood. The truth was not something to be uncovered. It was something that would consume him, as it had consumed all who had come before him. The garden was not a mystery to be solved. It was a trap, a force of nature that fed on those who sought to unravel its secrets. He turned back toward the altar, the faint glow of the symbols casting long shadows across the stone. There, lying in the chest, were the answers. But they were not the kind of answers that would grant him peace or closure. They were the kind that would bind him to this place forever, trapping him in a cycle of discovery and despair. The garden had claimed its witness. and there was no way out. The detective took a deep breath, his mind racing for any means of escape. His eyes darted around the room, searching for any hint of weakness, any crack in the stone that might offer him a way out. But there was nothing. The walls, the altar, the symbols, they were all part of the garden, part of its ancient design. They had been waiting for him, watching him from the moment he set foot in this cursed place. And now, there was no going back. The whispers grew louder, more urgent, filling his mind with a cacophony of voices. It has always been this way. You cannot leave. You are bound to the garden now. The words twisted and turned, growing louder, more insistent, until the detective felt as if his mind were being pulled apart. The garden had claimed him. It had claimed his soul. There was no escape from it now. He sank to his knees, the weight of the truth crashing down on him like a physical force. The truth was not just a secret to be revealed. It was a curse, a dark power that could not be undone. He had been foolish to think he could solve it, to think he could walk away with the answers. The garden was a living thing, a force that existed outside of time, outside of reason. It didn't need to make sense. It only needed to exist, to watch, to feed. A cold wind swept through the chamber, though there were no windows, no source for the draft. It was the garden, reaching out, pulling him in, drawing him deeper into its embrace. The detective's eyes blurred as he fought to hold on to his thoughts, but they slipped away, scattering like leaves in the wind. His mind was unraveling, his grasp on reality slipping. The garden's truth was too much for him to bear. He heard footsteps behind him, slow, measured. He turned, his vision swimming as he tried to focus. A figure appeared in the doorway, cloaked in shadow, its face obscured by darkness. It was the woman, the figure who had warned him, who had led him here. She stepped forward, her movements deliberate, like a dancer performing a ritual, and she knelt beside him. "You were never meant to leave," she said, her voice soft, almost tender. "The garden has claimed you. It will not let you go." The detective opened his mouth to speak, to protest, but no words came. He could feel it now, the weight of the garden's power, the weight of its secrets pressing down on him. It was inside him, wrapping around his heart, sinking deep into his bones. The woman reached out, her cold fingers brushing against his cheek, and for a moment, he thought he saw a flicker of pity in her eyes. "The truth is not something to be sought," she continued, her gaze distant, as though speaking to someone far away. "It is something that takes, that feeds, that binds. And once it has you, it never lets go." The detective's heart pounded in his chest, his mind screaming for him to fight, to escape. But there was no fight left in him. The garden had won. It had swallowed him whole. And now, there was no way out. The woman rose to her feet, her silhouette merging with the shadows. She stepped back, her figure dissolving into the darkness, leaving the detective alone in the chamber. He wanted to scream, to shout, but the words were trapped in his throat, unable to escape. The garden had silenced him, just as it had silenced all who had come before him. And in that silence, the truth settled around him, like the cold embrace of death. The garden had claimed another soul. It had claimed him. The whispers, once distant, were now all around him. He could hear them clearly, their voices swirling in his mind like the wind in the trees. "You are bound to the garden. You are one of us now." And in that moment, the detective knew. The garden had won, and he would never leave End